The dust kicked up from the wagon wheels as Catherine pulled her black shawl tighter around her shoulders. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly, but she felt cold inside. 3 months had passed since her husband died in that terrible accident at the copper mine, and now she was heading to the only place that would take her in the broken Arrow Ranch. Catherine stared at the letter in her weathered hands. The ranch owner had offered her work as a cook and housekeeper. She had no choice but to accept. At 28, she was too young to be a widow, but life had dealt her this hand. Her small savings were gone, spent on her husband's funeral and the debts he left behind. The wagon driver, an old man named Pete, glanced back at her. "Almost there, ma'am. See that ridge up ahead? The broken arrow sits just beyond it." Catherine nodded, trying to calm her nervous stomach. She had heard stories about ranch life, the rough men, the hard work, the isolation. But what choice did she have in the small town of Mesa Creek? There were no jobs for a woman like her as they crested the hill. The ranch spread out before them like something from a dream. Rolling green pastures stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with cattle and horses. The main house was bigger than anything Catherine had ever seen. A 2-story wooden structure with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Mighty. "Fine place," Pete said, whistling low. Old man Harrison built himself quite a spread here. Catherine's heart sank a little. She had hoped for something smaller, more manageable. This looked like the kind of place that would have dozens of workers, all expecting meals 3 times a day. How would she manage it all alone? The wagon pulled up to the front porch, and Catherine saw a figure emerge from the house. She expected to see the elderly ranch owner she had corresponded with, but instead a young man bounded down the steps. He was tall and lean, with sun-bleached hair and the kind of tan that came from working outdoors. He couldn't be more than 25. "You must be Mrs. Catherine," he said, approaching the wagon with a warm smile. "I'm Jake Harrison." "Welcome to the Broken Arrow." Catherine stared at him in confusion. "I was expecting to meet your father, Mr. Harrison." Jake's smile faded slightly, and he removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "I'm afraid there's been some confusion, ma'am. My father passed away 2 weeks ago." Hart gave out while he was checking the north pasture. The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. She gripped the side of the wagon, her knuckles white. "But the letter, ... the job." "The job is still yours if you want it," Jake said quickly, seeing her distress. "I need help more than ever now. The ranch hands can handle the cattle and horses, but I can't cook worth a damn, and the house is falling apart without someone to tend it." Pete helped Catherine down from the wagon, and she stood there feeling lost. This wasn't what she had planned for. Working for an elderly rancher was one thing, but being alone on a ranch with a young unmarried man was entirely different. What would people say? "I understand if you want to leave," Jake said quietly. "I can pay Pete to take you back to town, and I'll cover your expenses for the trouble." Catherine looked around at the beautiful ranch, then back at Jake's honest face. He seemed decent enough, and God knew she needed the work. What exactly would my duties be? Cooking for me and the 6 ranch hands? Keeping the main house clean? Maybe helping with the books if you can read and write well, Jake said. "There's a small cabin behind the main house where you'd stay. It's got its own kitchen and everything you'd need." The mention of separate quarters eased some of Catherine's worries. At least she wouldn't be staying in the main house with him. What about payment? $30 a month, plus room and board, Jake said. It's more than fair wages for this kind of work. Catherine's breath caught. $30 was more than she had ever made in her life. In town, she'd be lucky to find work that paid half that amount. She looked at her small trunk of belongings, then at the vast ranch spread out before her. "I'll need Sunday afternoons off for church," she said finally. Jake's face broke into a relieved grin. "Of course. Pete, would you mind helping me carry Mrs. Catherine's things to the cabin?" As they walked toward the small house behind the main building, Catherine felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The cabin was modest but clean, with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and a bedroom just big enough for a single bed and dresser. The previous housekeeper left some basic supplies, Jake said, opening cupboards to show her dishes, pots, and dry goods. "If you need anything else, just let me know." Catherine set her small bundle of personal items on the kitchen table. When would you like me to start? How about tomorrow morning? The hands usually eat at sunrise, then again at noon and supper. Time. Nothing fancy required, just good filling food. After Pete left and Jake returned to his work, Catherine sat alone in her new home. The silence was different here than in town. No wagon wheels on cobblestones, no shouting merchants, no church bells marking the hours, just the sound of wind through grass and the distant lowing of cattle. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 dresses in the small closet and placing her husband's photograph on the dresser beside the bed. His kind eyes seemed to look back at her with approval. He had always said she was stronger than she knew. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Catherine stepped onto the small porch of her cabin. The ranch was beautiful, she had to admit. And Jake seemed like a decent young man, even if his youth made her a bit uncomfortable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight she would rest. For the first time in months, she had a roof over her head, and work that would keep her fed. What in the life she had planned, but it was a start. Catherine woke before dawn, as she had trained herself to do during her marriage. The unfamiliar sounds of the ranch took her a moment to place horses nickering in the distance. Boots on wooden planks, men's voices calling to each other. She dressed quickly in her simple brown dress and tied her dark hair back in a practical bun. The main house kitchen was larger than her entire cabin. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with flour, beans, coffee, and preserved goods. A massive cast iron stove dominated one corner, and Catherine spent several minutes figuring out how to light it properly. She had cooked on a small wood stove in her married life. Nothing this grand. By the time the sun peeked over the horizon, she had coffee brewing and was mixing batter for flapjacks. The smell of bacon filled the air as footsteps thundered on the front porch. 6 ranch hands filed into the dining room, followed by Jake. "Boys, this is Mrs. Catherine, our new cook," Jake announced. "I expect you to treat her with proper respect." Men nodded politely, removing their hats. They were a mixed bunch, some young, some weathered by years of outdoor work. All looked hungry and eager for a hot meal. Catherine served them quickly and efficiently, refilling coffee cups and making sure everyone had enough food. The men ate with the focused intensity of those who did hard physical labor, speaking little, but showing their appreciation with clean plates and requests for seconds. "Fine cooking, ma'am," said an older ranch hand named Bill as he headed out for the day's work. "Best we've had in months." After the men left for their duties, Jake lingered in the kitchen. "That was wonderful, Mrs. Catherine. I can't remember the last time we had a proper breakfast. It's just flapjacks and bacon," Catherine said, but she felt pleased by the compliment. She began clearing dishes, establishing the rhythm that would carry her through each day. "Still, it means a lot," Jake said. He seemed to want to say something more, but instead grabbed his hat and headed for the door. "I'll be checking fences in the south pasture if you need anything." The morning passed quickly as Catherine explored the house and planned her cleaning schedule. The rooms were dusty, but well built, with sturdy furniture and large windows that let in plenty of light. Clearly, Jake's father had been a man of means. She found the ranch books in the study and was surprised to see they were in disarray. Numbers were scratched out, pages were torn, and several months of entries seemed to be missing entirely. As someone who had helped her husband with his accounts, Catherine could see this was a mess that needed attention. When noon came, she had soup and fresh bread ready. The men ate quickly and headed back to work, but Jake stayed behind again. "Catherine, I wonder if I could ask you something," he said, fidgeting with his coffee cup. "Of course, I noticed you looking at the account books. Pa never was good with numbers, and since he died, I've been trying to make sense of them. Would you be willing to help? I'd pay you extra, of course." Catherine considered this. Books was work she enjoyed, and the extra money would be welcome. "I could take a look this afternoon if you'd like." Relief flooded Jake's face. "That would be wonderful. I'm worried we might be losing money without knowing it." That afternoon, Catherine spread the ledger books across the kitchen table and began. Making sense of the chaos was worse than she had thought. Bills were unpaid, cattle sales weren't properly recorded, and it looked like some suppliers were charging twice for the same goods. She was deep in calculations when Jake returned from the range. He looked tired and worried, his shirt stained with sweat and dust. "How bad is it?" he asked, seeing her frown. "Bad, but not hopeless," Catherine said honestly. "Your father owed more money than I expected, but you also have assets he never properly accounted for. That northern herd, for instance, it's worth twice what's written here." Jake sank into a chair across from her. "Pa always said book learning was a waste of time. Said a man just needed to know his land and his cattle. He built a successful ranch," Catherine said gently. "But keeping proper records is important too." For the next hour, Catherine walked Jake through the accounts, explaining what needed to be paid immediately and what could wait. She reorganized the books into a system that made sense, using clear handwriting to replace the scattered notes. "You're amazing at this," Jake said, watching her work. "Where did you learn?" "My husband owned a small business in town," Catherine explained. "I helped him with the books. It's just common sense, really." "It's not to me," Jake admitted. "I feel like I'm drowning in numbers." Catherine looked at him with new sympathy. He was so young to have this responsibility thrust upon him. "It gets easier. With practice, I could teach you if you'd like." "Would you?" "I mean, I don't want to take advantage of your kindness." "It's not kindness," Catherine said firmly. "If the ranch fails, I lose my job. Yeah, we both have an interest in keeping things running smoothly." That evening, after serving supper to the ranch hands, Catherine returned to her cabin feeling more useful than she had in months. The work was hard, but it was satisfying in a way her previous life had never been. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Jake standing on her porch, hat in hand. "I wanted to thank you properly for today," he said. "The books, the cooking, everything. I know this isn't what you expected when you took the job." "Life rarely gives us what we expect," Catherine said quietly. "I also wanted you to know that if anyone in town says anything about you working here, about it not being proper, you can tell them to mind their own business. You're a widow trying to make an honest living, and there's nothing shameful in that." Catherine was touched by his concern. "Thank you. I was worried about that myself." "You don't need to worry. People who matter will see that you're a decent woman doing honest work." After Jake left, Catherine sat on her porch, watching the stars appear in the clear desert sky. The ranch was beginning to feel less foreign, more like a place she might actually belong. Jake was proving to be a thoughtful employer, and the work, while challenging, was work she could take pride in. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose and the beginning of hope for a better future. 3 weeks into her employment, Catherine had settled into a comfortable routine. The ranch hands no longer seemed surprised to see her bustling around the kitchen before sunrise, and Jake had taken to lingering after meals to discuss the day's plans and ranch business. She found herself looking forward to these conversations more than she cared to admit. The account books were finally in order, and Catherine had discovered that the Broken Arrow was actually more profitable than Jake had realized. Several unpaid bills were actually overpayments that needed to be collected, and the cattle inventory was worth significantly more than his father had recorded. "We could expand the herd by 30% without straining our resources," Catherine told Jake as they reviewed the weekly figures. "The north pasture could support more cattle, and the market prices are good right now." Jake studied the numbers she had laid out so clearly. "You're sure about this? It seems too good to be true." "The numbers don't lie," Catherine assured him. "Your father was conservative in his estimates, probably to avoid disappointment. Being too cautious can cost money too." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching at high speed. Jake jumped up and looked out the window, his expression growing serious. "Trouble," he said simply. Grabbing his rifle from the rack near the door, 3 riders pulled up in the yard, their horses lathered with sweat. The man in the lead was someone Catherine had never seen before, older than Jake. With expensive clothes and a gold watch chain glinting across his vest, "Harrison," the man called out, "we need to talk." Jake stepped onto the porch, and Catherine found herself following despite her better judgment. Something about the man's tone made her uneasy. "Mr. Dalton?" Jake said evenly. "All the way out here?" "You know exactly why I'm here," Dalton replied, dismounting and approaching the porch. His eyes flicked to Catherine briefly before returning to Jake. "My offer still stands. 50,000 for the whole spread." Catherine's breath caught. $50,000 was an enormous sum of money. "And my answer is still no," Jake said firmly. Dalton's face hardened. "Boy, you're making a mistake. This ranch is too much for someone your age to handle. Your father knew what he was doing, but you're in over your head." "The ranch is doing fine," Jake replied. "Is it?" Dalton pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Because according to this, you're 3 months behind on your loan payments to the Mesa Creek Bank. That's grounds for foreclosure." Catherine saw Jake's face go pale. They had been through all the books together, and she had seen no record of any loan payments. "That's impossible," Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. Dalton smiled coldly. "Your father borrowed heavily. Last year to expand the herd. The paperwork is all legal and proper. You can check with the bank if you'd like." "I'll do that," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You do that, son? But when the bank takes this place, remember that I offered you a fair price. After foreclosure, you won't see a penny." After Dalton and his men rode away, Jake slumped against the porch railing. Catherine could see the defeat in his shoulders. "Jake," she said gently, "let me look through the papers again. Maybe there's something we missed, but there's no point." Jake said bitterly, "Pa must have hidden the loan documents. Probably didn't want me to worry about the debt." "Don't give up yet," Catherine insisted. "Let's go through everything one more time." They spent the rest of the afternoon combing through every paper in the house. Catherine checked every drawer, every box, every hiding place she could think of. Finally, in her father's bedroom, she found a small wooden box tucked under the floorboards beneath his bed. Inside were documents that made her heart race. There was indeed a loan agreement with the Mesa Creek Bank. But as she read through it carefully, she noticed something important. "Jake," she called excitedly, "come look at this." He found her sitting on his father's bed surrounded by papers. "What is it?" "The loan was paid off," she said, holding up a receipt. "Look at this. Your father made the final payment 2 weeks before he died." Jake stared at the paper in disbelief. "But Dalton said—" "Dalton is lying," Catherine said firmly. "Either that, or someone at the bank is playing games with the records." Hope began to return to Jake's eyes. "So the ranch is really ours?" "According to this paperwork, yes. But we need to get to town first thing tomorrow and straighten this out with the bank." That evening, Jake was more talkative than usual as they worked on the books together. The relief at discovering his father had paid off the loan had lifted a weight from his shoulders. "Your help," he told Catherine. "Oh, Pa always handled the business side of things." "You would have figured it out," Catherine assured him. "You're smarter than you give yourself credit for." Jake was quiet for a moment, then said, "Catherine, can I ask you something personal?" She tensed slightly. "Do you ever miss your old life? Your husband? Your home in town?" Catherine considered the question carefully. "I miss my husband, of course. But the life we had together wasn't. It wasn't fulfilling the way this work is. He was a good man, but he didn't really see me as a partner. Here, I feel like what I do matters." "It does matter," Jake said quietly. "More than you know," or something in his voice that made Catherine look up from the ledger she was working on. Jake was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I should get back to my cabin," she said suddenly, feeling flustered. "Tomorrow will be a long day." As she walked across the yard to her small house, Catherine found herself thinking about Jake in ways that made her uncomfortable. He was younger than her employer, and she was still in mourning for her husband. These feelings she was developing were inappropriate and dangerous, but as she lay in bed that night, she couldn't stop thinking about the way Jake had looked at her, or the warmth in his voice when he thanked her. Despite all her rational objections, something was growing between them, and Catherine wasn't sure she had the strength to stop it. The trip to Mesa Creek the next morning confirmed Catherine's suspicions. The bank clerk shuffled through his files nervously when Jake presented the paid loan receipt, finally admitting that there had been an error in their records. "Most unusual," the clerk muttered, making careful notes. "I'll make sure this is corrected immediately, Mr. Harrison." Outside the bank, Jake was furious. That was no error. Someone paid that clerk to say the loan wasn't paid. Dalton Catherine agreed. Wants your ranch badly enough to try fraud, but why? There are other ranches for sale in the territory. Catherine had been thinking about this during the ride to town. Water rights, maybe? Or maybe he knows something about your land that you don't. They spent the morning visiting the land office and courthouse, researching property records and recent sales. What they discovered made Jake whistle low under his breath. The railroad, he said, staring at the surveyor's map. They're planning to run a line right through our property. That would make your ranch worth 10 times what Dalton offered, Catherine said, understanding flooding through her. Pa must have known. That's why he expanded the herd last year, even if it meant taking out a loan. Their research was interrupted by a commotion in the street outside. Through the courthouse window, Catherine saw Dalton talking animatedly with several men in suits. When he spotted Jake and Catherine through the window, his expression darkened. "We should head back," Catherine said uneasily. The ride home was tense. Catherine found herself glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see Dalton and his men following them. Jake was quiet, lost in thought about what they had discovered. "What will you do now?" Catherine asked as they neared the ranch. "Hold on to the land," Jake said firmly. "Pa worked too hard building this place to let someone steal it through lies and fraud. Dalton won't give up easily." "I know," Jake said grimly. Their concerns proved justified over the next few days. Cattle were found with their fences cut, allowing them to wander onto neighboring property. The well water was contaminated with something that made the horses sick. Small fires broke out. In the hay barn, it's quickly extinguished but clearly set deliberately. Jake hired extra men to patrol the property at night. But the harassment continued. The ranch hands were nervous, and 2 of them quit rather than risk their safety. "This can't go on," Catherine told Jake as they surveyed damage to the feed storage shed. "Someone could get seriously hurt. I won't let him drive me off my own." "Land," Jake replied stubbornly. "Then we need to find another way to stop him." That evening, Catherine was working late in the kitchen when she heard horses approaching. She looked out the window and saw 4 riders surrounding the house there, faces hidden by bandanas. Fear shot through her as she realized Jake was out checking the north pasture and wouldn't be back for hours. One of the men dismounted and approached the front door. Catherine grabbed a kitchen knife and pressed herself against the wall, hoping they would think the house was empty. "We know you're in there, lady," a gruff voice called out. "Come out, and nobody gets hurt." Catherine's heart pounded as she tried to think of what to do. The back door was too far away, and there were riders, positioned to see anyone who tried to escape that way. "Your boss man ain't here to protect you," the voice continued. "Come out now, and we'll just have a little talk." Catherine knew that men like these didn't want to talk to a woman alone. She gripped the knife tighter and tried to remember if Jake kept any guns in the house. Then she heard the sound of approaching horses from a different direction. The men outside heard it too, and their voices became urgent. "Someone's coming," one of them hissed. "Let's go," another replied. "Come back another time." Catherine watched through the window as the 4 riders galloped away into the darkness. Moments later, Jake appeared, along with 2 of the remaining ranch hands. "Catherine," Jake called out, dismounting quickly. "Are you all right?" She opened the door, still clutching the knife, her hands shaking. "They were here," she managed to say for men with covered faces. Jake's expression darkened as she described what had happened. "That's it," he said finally. "This has gone too far. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to pay Mr. Dalton a visit and end this once and for all." "Jake." "No." Catherine grabbed his arm. "That's exactly what he wants. If you confront him directly, he'll have you arrested for threatening him. Or worse, I can't let him terrorize. You like this?" The concern in Jake's voice made Catherine's heart flutter despite the frightening situation. There must be a legal way to stop him. Legal doesn't work against men like Dalton. He owns half the officials in this county. Catherine spent a sleepless night thinking about their options. By morning, she had an idea. "The territorial governor," she told Jake over breakfast. "If we can get word to him about what's happening here, he might be able to help."
What makes
"You think he'd listen to us? Because what Dalton is doing threatens more than just your ranch? If he can use fraud and intimidation to steal one person's land, he can do it to anyone. That's bad for the whole territory." Jake considered this. How would we reach him? I'll write a letter explaining everything with copies of all the documents we found. We can send it with the next mail stage and hope it gets through. It's better than doing nothing or doing something that gets you killed." That afternoon, Catherine carefully composed a letter to the territorial governor, detailing Dalton's attempts to defraud Jake out of his ranch and the escalating intimidation tactics. She included copies of the paid loan receipt and the railroad survey maps, building a case that showed a pattern of corruption that threatened honest settlers throughout the territory. Jake read over her letter before they sealed it. "You write better than most lawyers I've met," he said admiringly. "Hope it's enough," Catherine replied. As they prepared the packet for mailing, Jake suddenly took her hand. "Catherine, I need you to know something." She looked up at him, her heart beginning to race. "If something happens to me, there's money hidden in the house. Enough for you to start over somewhere safe." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Catherine said firmly. "But if it does, Jake Harrison, don't you dare talk like that," she interrupted, surprised by the fierceness in her own voice. "We're going to get through this together." The word "together" hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than either of them had intended. Jake's thumb traced across her knuckles, and Catherine realized she didn't want to pull her hand away. The letter to the territorial governor was sent off with the morning mail stage, but Catherine knew it would be weeks before they could expect any response. In the meantime, Dalton's harassment campaign intensified. Someone poisoned the water trough near the south pasture, killing 3 head of cattle. The chicken coop was set on fire in the middle of the night, and only Jake's quick action with buckets of water saved the main barn. Most troubling of all, rifle shots were fired near the house after dark, though no one was hurt. "He's trying to wear us down," Jake said grimly as they surveyed the latest damage. "Make us so tired and scared that selling seems like the only option." Catherine had dark circles under her eyes from sleepless nights, but her resolve remained firm. "Then we need to show him we won't break." "How?" "I can't ask the hands to risk their lives, and I can't be everywhere at once." Catherine had been thinking about this problem. What if we weren't trying to defend everything? What if we made them come to us? "What do you mean?" "The cattle closer to the main buildings? Set up sleeping quarters in the barn for the hands who are willing to stay? Make this place like a fort? They'd have to attack directly, instead of picking at the edges." Jake considered her suggestion. "That might work. But it would mean admitting we can't protect the whole ranch." "Sometimes retreat is the smartest strategy," Catherine said. "We hold what we can until help arrives." They spent the next day reorganizing their defenses. The remaining cattle were moved to the pastures nearest the house. Extra rifles were distributed to the hands who stayed, and sleeping arrangements were made in the barn and bunkhouse. Catherine moved her things back into the main house, despite her concerns about propriety. "It's not safe for you in that cabin alone," Jake insisted when she hesitated. "There's a spare room upstairs with a lock on the door." That night, as Catherine lay in the unfamiliar bed in Jake's house, she could hear him pacing in his room down the hall. The sound was oddly comforting, a reminder that she wasn't facing this danger alone. She woke before dawn to the sound of shouting. Grabbing her wrapper, she ran to the window and saw flames in the distance. The northern hay barn was on fire by the time she dressed and got downstairs. Jake was already organizing the men to fight the blaze. Catherine ran to help, carrying buckets of water from the well. The barn was too far gone to save, but they managed to keep the fire from spreading to other buildings. "This has to stop," Catherine said as they watched the barn burn down to its foundation. "We can't keep this up much longer." Jake's face was streaked with soot and exhaustion. "I know, but what choice do we have?" Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Catherine tensed, expecting another attack, but instead saw a group of men in uniform riding toward them. Territorial marshals, Jake breathed in amazement. The lead rider dismounted and approached them. He was a tall, weathered man with a badge glinting on his chest. "You Jake Harrison?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Marshal Davidson. We got word from the governor's office about some trouble you've been having." Catherine felt weak with relief. Their letter had gotten through, and help had arrived much sooner than expected. "Yes, sir," Jake said. "Someone's been trying to force me off my land through intimidation and fraud." "You know about that," the marshal said grimly. "Hey, we've been tracking A pattern of similar activities across the territory. Always the same methods. Always the same man behind it. Dalton, Catherine said, among others. There's a whole organization involved, including some corrupt officials. Your letter gave us the evidence we needed to move against them. Over the next hour, Jake and Catherine told the marshals everything that had happened. The lawmen took careful notes and examined the damaged buildings. We'll need you both to testify at the territorial capital, Marshal Davidson said. But first, we're going to arrest Dalton and his associates. What about the bank clerk who lied about the loan? Catherine asked. Him too. Governor takes a dim view of corruption, especially when it involves defrauding honest settlers. As the marshals prepared to leave, Jake felt lighter than he had in weeks. How long before this is over? The arrests should happen today, Davidson said. After that, it's up to the courts. But with the evidence you've provided, I don't think you'll have any more trouble. After the marshals left, Catherine and Jake found themselves alone in the kitchen. The immediate danger was over, but Catherine realized that meant she no longer had an excuse to stay in the main house. I should move back to my cabin, she said. Reluctantly, should you? Jake asked quietly. Catherine looked up at him, seeing something in his eyes that made her heart race. It wouldn't be proper for me to stay here now that the trouble is over, Catherine, Jake said, stepping closer to her. I need to tell you something. She knew she should step away, should maintain the appropriate distance between employer and employee, but she found herself rooted to the spot. What is it? It's these past weeks. Facing all this danger with you, I've realized something. He reached out and gently touched her face. I've fallen in love with you. Catherine's breath caught. Jake, you can't say things like that. Why not? Because I'm younger than you? Because you work for me? Because you're a widow? All of those reasons, Catherine whispered, though her treacherous heart was singing at his words. I don't care about any of that, Jake said firmly. I care about you. I care about how smart you are, how brave you've been, how you've stood by me when things got dangerous. People will talk. Let them talk. Catherine, when those men threatened you, when I thought something might happen to you, I realized that nothing else mattered except keeping you safe. Catherine felt tears building in her eyes. Jake, I'm scared. Of me? He asked, his voice gentle. Of these feelings, she admitted. Never expected to feel this way again. After my husband died, I thought that part of my life was over. Jake's hand moved to cup her cheek. Maybe it doesn't have to be over. Catherine closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite herself. What are you asking me? I'm asking you to give us a chance. I'm asking you to stop thinking about what other people might say and think about what you want. What I want, Catherine. Repeated softly, the words felt foreign on her tongue. For so long, she had focused only on survival, on doing what was necessary. She had forgotten about wanting things for herself. I want you to be happy, Jake said. I want to be the one. Who makes you happy if you'll let me? Catherine opened her eyes and looked at him. He was so young, so earnest, so full of hope for the future. Could she really allow herself to want that future with him? The ranch hands will lose respect for you if you take up with the hired help, she said weakly. Jake smiled. Then I guess I'll have to fire the hired help, Jake, and hire a partner instead. Someone who knows the business as well as I do. Someone I can trust completely. Catherine's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. A partner. In every sense of the word, Jake said seriously. Catherine, I'm asking you to marry me. The words hung in the air between them. Catherine stared at him, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Not just love, but true partnership. Not just a home, but a future they would build together. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, Jake urged. Say you'll take a chance on us. Catherine thought about her husband, about the guilt she had carried about not grieving him properly. But she realized that he would have wanted her to be happy, would have wanted her to find love again. Yes, she said quietly, and then louder. Yes, I'll marry you. Jake's face lit up with joy, and he pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen. When he set her down, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. We'll have to wait a proper amount of time, Catherine said, trying to be practical even as happiness flooded through her. How long is proper? Jake asked, nuzzling her neck. 6 months at least, maybe a year. Jake groaned dramatically. A year? I don't think I can wait a year to kiss my wife properly. You're not supposed to be kissing me at all until we're married, Catherine said, but she made no move to step out of his arms. Then we'd better get married soon, Jake said, and leaned down to kiss her anyway. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise for the future they would build together. When they finally broke apart, Catherine felt like a different woman than the frightened widow who had arrived at the ranch months ago. Territorial marshals want us to testify, she said, trying to return to practical matters. We'll go together, Jake said. As partners. Partners, Catherine repeated, liking the sound of it. Outside. The sun was setting over the Broken Arrow Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The immediate danger was over, but Catherine knew their real adventure was just beginning. They had a ranch to run, a future to plan, and love to nurture. For the first time since her husband's death, Catherine felt truly alive. She had found not just a job or a home, but a purpose and a partner who valued her for exactly who she was. The frightened widow was gone, replaced by a woman ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As Jake's arms tightened around her, Catherine smiled. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities and new adventures, but tonight she was exactly where she belonged. 6 months later, Catherine stood in front of the mirror in her cabin, adjusting the simple white dress she had sewn for her wedding day. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and new, and it made her feel beautiful. Outside, she could hear the sounds of preparation as neighbors and friends gathered for the ceremony. The territorial marshals had been true to their word. Dalton and his associates were now in prison, awaiting trial for fraud and intimidation. The corrupt bank clerk had been fired and fined, and the railroad company had approached Jake directly about purchasing a right-of-way through his property for a fair price. The Broken Arrow Ranch was not only secure, but thriving. With Catherine's help managing the books and planning expansions, they had increased their profits by 40%. The new cattle barn had been built twice the size of the one that burned down, and they had hired back all the hands who had quit during the troubles, plus several more. A gentle knock on the cabin door interrupted Catherine's thoughts. "Come in," she called. To her surprise, it was Bill, the oldest of the ranch hands. He held his hat in his weathered hands and looked nervous. "Begging your pardon, ma'am," he said awkwardly, "but the boys and I, we wanted to give you something. Before the ceremony." "That's very kind, but you didn't need to." "Yes, we did," Bill interrupted. "You saved this ranch and you saved our jobs. More than that, you made this place feel like a real home again." He handed her a small wooden box, clearly handmade. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a simple gold locket, belonged to Jake's mother, Bill explained. "Mr. Harrison Sr. gave it to us for safekeeping before he died. Said it should go to the woman Jake married someday. We all agree there couldn't be a better choice." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes as she lifted the delicate locket from the box. "Are you sure Jake wants me to have this?" "Ma'am, that boy loves you more than life itself. We've all seen it. And if you don't mind me saying so, you've been good for him. Made him steadier, more confident." Catherine fastened the locket around her neck, where it settled perfectly at her throat. "Thank you, Bill. All of you." After Bill left, Catherine took one last look around the cabin that had been her home for the past months. Tomorrow, she would move into the main house as Jake's wife and true partner. The thought still made her nervous, but it was a good kind of nervous. It's the kind that came with new adventures and unlimited possibilities. Another knock on the door announced Jake's arrival. "Catherine, are you ready?" She opened the door to find him standing there in his best suit, his hair neatly combed, and his face shining with happiness. When he saw her in her wedding dress, his expression grew soft with wonder. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "So do you," Catherine replied, and meant it. Over the past months, Jake had grown into his role as ranch owner. The uncertainty in youth that had marked him when they first met had been replaced by confidence and purpose. "I have something for you," Jake said, pulling a small wrapped package from his pocket. "Jake, you don't need to give me presents?" "Yes, I do. Open it." Inside the wrapping was a simple gold wedding band. "It's not fancy," Jake said apologetically, "but it's real gold, and it's yours." Catherine slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit perfectly. "How did you know the right size?" Jake grinned. "I may have borrowed one of your other rings to take to the jeweler in town." "Sneaky," Catherine accused, but she was smiling. "Ready to become Mrs. Harrison?" Jake asked, offering her his arm. "Ready," Catherine said firmly. They walked together toward the main house, where chairs had been set up in rows on the front lawn. Catherine was amazed at how many people had come. Ranch hands from neighboring spreads, townspeople from Mesa Creek, even the territorial marshal who had helped them months earlier. The preacher from the church in town stood waiting under an arch of wildflowers that some of the neighbors had constructed that morning. As Catherine and Jake approached, everyone rose to their feet. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Jake Harrison and Catherine Wilson in holy matrimony." As the ceremony proceeded, Catherine found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Less than a year ago, she had been a frightened widow with nowhere to go and no prospects for the future. She was about to become the wife of a successful rancher and a full partner in a thriving business. "Do you, Jake Harrison, take Catherine to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Jake said clearly, his eyes never leaving Catherine's face. "Do you, Catherine Wilson, take Jake to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live?" Catherine took a deep breath. She thought about her first husband, about the love they had shared, and the lessons she had learned. Then she looked at Jake, at the man who had seen her, not just as a housekeeper or a widow in need of charity, but as a partner and an equal. "I do," she said, her voice strong and sure. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jake, you may kiss your bride." Jake's kiss was gentle but passionate, full of promise for their future together. When they broke apart, the assembled crowd cheered and threw rice and flower petals as they walked back down the makeshift aisle as husband and wife. Catherine caught sight of her reflection in the front window of the house. The frightened, defeated woman who had arrived at the Broken Arrow was gone completely. In her place was someone confident and radiant, ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. The celebration continued late into the evening. There was music and dancing, plenty of food, and countless toasts to the happy couple. Catherine found herself pulled from conversation to conversation, accepting congratulations and well wishes from people who had become true friends. As the last guests finally departed and the cleanup was finished, Catherine and Jake found themselves alone on the front porch of their house. The moon was full overhead, casting silver light across the ranch that was now their shared home. "No regrets?" Jake asked, taking her hand. Catherine looked out over the land they would work together, the life they would build side by side. "None at all," she said honestly. "This feels like exactly where I'm supposed to be." Jake squeezed her hand. "I love you, Mrs. Harrison." "I love you too, Mr. Harrison." They stood together in comfortable silence, two people who had found in each other not just love, but true partnership. The ranch stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as equals and as partners in every sense of the word. Catherine had come to the Broken Arrow Ranch as a desperate widow seeking employment. She was staying as a beloved wife and business partner, ready to build a future that was brighter than anything she had ever dared to dream. The story that had begun with loss and uncertainty was now beginning a new chapter filled with love, purpose, and endless possibility.